guys, we want to thank all of you so much for coming for the in-store part of this event. And also we want to thank all of you that are watching virtually. We are just thrilled to have today Leslye Penelope here for her book, The Monsters We Defy. And this book has gotten just rave reviews, not just from Publishers Weekly, but Rebecca Rowanhorst, a lot of the authors that we love and have had here in the store that just found the book riveting. And we're going to have as our conversation partner, DJ, who is a teacher and an avid reader and book blogger. And so this book, you've got a supernatural heist with a thriller with a woman who can speak to the dead, and spilling over as the adventure and mystery unfold in the famous Black Broadway in Washington, D.C. We just want to give a big warm welcome to Leslye Penelope.
Thank you.
Hi. So Leslye, would you like to tell everyone more specific things about your book, Monsters We Defy?
Sure. The Monsters We Defy, it's a 1925 fantasy heist that takes place in Washington, D.C. And there's a crew of characters that get together that have to steal a magical ring in order to save the city. And the idea that I had originally was to do a Harlem Renaissance era fantasy heist. And originally I was going to set it in Harlem, but I was writing it in the spring of 2020, summer of 2020, and so I couldn't really travel to New York. I live outside of Washington, D.C. My family is from Washington, D.C., and I don't think that there's enough books set there. And also, once I started doing the research, I discovered all of the wonderful history, Black history that DC had in that time period. So I was like, oh, I'm going to set the book in DC and introduce people to some of this history, and I can work in some real life characters that people will recognize and maybe some that you won't, and just have a really fun magical heist in the city that I know a little bit better.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about Black Broadway?
Yeah, so in DC, U Street in Northwest was called Black Broadway. I believe that Pearl Bailey was the one who coined the term, and it was because it was a street full of theaters and nightclubs and entertainment, and the whole area, the neighborhood, was really a self-sufficient Black community. DC at the time, like in the late 1800s, it had the highest population of Blacks in the country. And then slowly over time, as Jim Crow set in and things got more and more segregated, that changed and population shifted to New York. But it had a huge legacy for the Black community. And so, yeah, Black Broadway, U Street, that whole neighborhood, it was full of business owners and entertainers, musicians, theater, movies, when they came in. A lot of it was centered there. So it was just the heart of culture in the city. And I wasn't really familiar with that term until I started doing the research. And so, yeah, I wanted to do something, people, when I was telling people I was writing something in the 20s, they were like, oh, the Roaring 20s. And the jazz age, that's kind of what people think of. And I know that those times were very difficult for Black people in this country also, because we had, in the book, the Ku Klux Klan actually marched down Pennsylvania Avenue right in front of the White House in 1925, and that's a little snapshot of that is in the book. So there's these multiple things happening, and it's like a complex time period where there's a lot of good that people might not have known about, that people just living wonderful, full lives, and then dealing with the racism and the prejudice and the violence and the danger of the time period also.
So with all of this going on in DC, how did you create such an amazing book?
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to do something, it's always kind of about characters and finding the characters that I wanted to follow, and then telling a story that I was hoping was just entertaining. I love heists. Most people love heists. It's a little bit, kind of my spin on a heist. So I hadn't done one before, and it was like a challenge for myself to be like, well, can I do this? It was a little bit scary. And I think it's important, like as a writer and as an artist of any kind, to challenge yourself and to try to do something that you're not sure that you can pull off. And just scare yourself a little bit. So I took on the challenge and just tried to do something that was both, adventure, entertaining, that whole thing, but like about characters that you could relate to and that you can care about their stories and their inner lives, as well as the, outer world of the plot going on.
Which, as a reader, I really like how well you executed the heist portion of the book. Can you tell us a little bit about Clara?
Yes, Clara is the main character, Clara Johnson, she was born with a caul, which means she was born with it. In a lot of cultures all around the world, actually, being born with like the amniotic sac over your face, a lot of people believe that it means that you can see the spirit world, or you can see ghosts, or you have some sort of psychic abilities. So she can speak to ghosts, and that's been a problem her whole life. She kind of shuts them out. We also have her grandmother, who is a ghost, Mama Octavia, who is still around and helping her through things. And Clara is sort of a prickly character. She's had a lot of adversity in her life, and it's difficult for her to trust. And so she has this ability that she was born with, and then also she has made a deal with the spirit. So in the book, the spirits are called enigmas, and you can make a deal with them, and you'll get a charm, which is a special power, and a trick, which is something that is like a debt that you owe. That is kind of the other side of the coin of the power, because everything has a cost. And so there are several characters in the book that have made different deals with these spirits, these enigmas, and have charms and tricks. And so Clara's trick is that because she has this power that she can speak to spirits and ghosts, she has to facilitate deals for other people, which she hates because she knows she's giving them something good, the charm, but she's also saddling them with this trick. And it causes her a lot of guilt. And she's the one who initially, has the chance to make another deal, and then she brings everybody together for this heist in order to free herself from, the deal that she made initially, and try to get out of the guilt and then get out of this trap.
Which, once again, as a reader, I thought it was like, I really, as you and I talked about, I really liked Clara, and I understand how hard it was to trust other people. But at the same time, like, one of the tropes I like in any book is found family. And I like how she had like a family with everyone that she facilitated debts with.
Yeah, part of the story is, these people coming together for necessity. And Clara fights it every step of the way initially. Like she does not trust people. She's not sure she wants to even do this. She's not sure that, these people that she'd bring on, that she really wants to help, but she's not sure if it's going to work out. So, it's a story about like that goal. I mean, that journey of hers and having a found family, because everybody who's in on the heist, there's 5 main characters are part of this crew. And most of them have charms and tricks and would like to be rid of them. And so they sort of are in this position where they can help each other out, and they're forced to become this sort of family and create those relationships.
I like that also, and I like how diverse the characters were. You had, she actually mentioned Carter G. Woodson. Yes, he's in the book. How did you facilitate or add him and Langston Hughes to your book?
Yeah, so like I said, I wanted to have real historical characters in the book. And so Langston Hughes is there, Carter G. Woodson is there. Clara, her job is actually, she is a typist for Dr. Carter G. Woodson's publication, which was the Journal of Negro History. And Dr. Woodson was the person who basically created what's now known as Black History Month. Back then it was called Black History Week. And so he created a publishing company that had this journal that had other publications focused on Black history. And that was sort of his mission in life. He had been a professor at Howard and different colleges also. And so once I was digging into, okay, who are these people that I could put in this book and how can I fit them in? I came across that Langston Hughes, he had roots in DC. And in 1925, the year that I set the book, he actually moved back in with his mother he'd gone a bunch of places, been around the world. He moved in with his mother and he had another job. And then in his autobiography, he talks about he was Carter G. Woodson's assistant for a while. And so I was like, oh, I can kill 2 birds with one stone if that's how I set her job there. I was like, okay, I can get both of these people in there. And then reading his autobiography, the things he had to say about working there, it gave me an idea about his personality that I hadn't gotten before, just like reading his poems. And so, yeah, we have this character who is on the side. He helps in a meaningful way down the line in the book. But it was just a lot of fun to try to imagine, okay, these people that I've read about or heard about, how can I introduce them to people who might not be familiar with them? And then also imagine what their personalities were like. Imagine how they would interact with my characters and how they could, help them along the way.
And I really like that because it made the story seem more earthbound because there are realistic characters in there.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, because you and I talked about this, but can you tell us the history of Clara? Why she is so significant in the story?
So I found Clara. Clara is actually based on a real person. When I was doing research for this, and I decided it was going to be in DC, I was looking into all kinds of DC history. And I didn't actually know that in 1919, DC had race riots as a part of Red Summer, which you might have heard about. So all over the country in that year, tensions were boiling over, and in many parts of the country, there were race riots. And DC was not exempt. And it was 4 or 5 days of a lot of violence. A lot of people were actually killed. So the real Clara Johnson was 17 years old in 1919, and she was in her house during the riots, and someone said that there was a sniper shooting at white people and white police officers. The neighbors dispute whether there was actually a sniper or not. But whatever the case was, police officers broke into her house, ran into her bedroom where she was hiding under the bed with a gun, and she shot back. They shot her. She actually killed a white police officer and went to jail. She was convicted of manslaughter at 17 years old. And it reminded me of Breonna Taylor, police officers coming into your bedroom. But the amazing thing about the real person is that a year and a half after she was convicted, when she tried to get a new trial, she was actually let go because the original judge on his deathbed regretted not allowing her to plead self-defense. She hadn't been allowed to plead that, and then, of course, she was convicted. So the second judge knew this and allowed her to plead self-defense, and then the district attorney dropped the charges because he knew he wouldn't get another conviction. And I read that, and the time period that it was happening, I was just like, how did this happen? And I was like, what if it was magic involved somehow in this? That's the only way I could figure out that this had even happened. And that was kind of the spark. That was like, okay, we don't know much about what happened to her after she was released from jail. There's some other anecdotes that I found, but she kind of disappears. And so I set the book 6 years after the riots and imagined, what is her life like now? What did she go on to do after having this experience? How did that scar her? That's a big part of the reason why she doesn't trust. And, adding the magical element to it, and then the charm and the trick. And so, yeah, I kind of just went off running with my imagination, basing it on a real person in a real situation that I thought was just incredible. And I had no idea about it until I started actually digging in and doing some of the tons of research that I did in order to make this book happen.
Yes. So I imagine all of you didn't realize you would learn something today. and that's how it was when I read the book. And I was like, whoa, not only did she mention Langston Hughes and Dr. Carter G. Woodson, Clara, so once you read the book, which you should, at the end of the book, there is author notes, and she tells you more about Clara and her research involved with writing this book. And I was so impressed, like I told you. But at the same time, tell me about her roomie that we all like.
Yes. So many people's favorite character is Clara's roommate, Zelda. So Zelda is, she was a Black person with albinism. And so I was inspired because I had, again, in the research, found out that a lot of circuses and carnivals would hire, sometimes hiring means not paying or kidnapping or acquiring people in some way, white and Black people who had albinism, and put them in freak shows with other people who are unusual at the time. And so I have the character of Zelda having basically been sold by her mother because there were too many children. And she grows up in the circus. So she has lots of circus skills. And that comes to play in the book. And she's a fantastic character. I really loved writing her because she's another person who's been through a lot of adversity and had a lot of things happen to them, but doesn't let it get them down. And Zelda is, she is on the affinity chart or whatever it's called. I think she's a chaotic neutral. She'll surprise you. And that kind of character is always really fun to write. And she's the only one of the crew of the heist that doesn't have a charm or a trick, because she doesn't really need one. She just has all of these skills of her own. And she's very loyal to Clara as a friend, and is instrumental in kind of pulling Clara out of her shell and just being that, ride or die kind of friend for her.
Which I like. And she's fun reading, trust me. You'll love Zelda. So we have some horror, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to touch a little bit on that, or?
Yeah, it's kind of not too spoilery, but yeah, it has to do with the reason why they're trying to steal a magical ring, essentially, and because it's causing negative effects on their community. basically. So I do have, it's not, I don't think it's too scary. It's just, I wouldn't consider it scary. I dabble in horror, but not really. I'm more of a fantasy writer, but it pulls in other genres by its nature. And so when you have spirits who are sort of cursing people, there's all kinds of things that can happen that can be a little bit horror-ish.
It's horror-ish, history. What about romance? Does this book have romance?
It does, yes. I also write paranormal romance, so I always want to have some kind of love story in the book. And so, yeah, another person in the crew, Isabelle Lee, is our love interest. He's a musician, and he has very interesting charm and trick to go along with that. And so, yeah, there's a little bit of a love story. It's nothing, nothing like my actual romance books. So it's very, all ages can read this. But yeah, it's always fun to have people falling in love.
Yes, it's really good. What else would you like to call it? Do you have anything else to say?
Yeah, the other two characters, we haven't talked about Jessie Lee and Aristotle. Jessie Lee was a World War I veteran, and that's kind of how he goes into, his experiences in the war lead him to making the deal with the spirit. Aristotle is the oldest member of the crew. He's a performer, vaudevillian performer, and I got the idea for him because I wanted to have a Black actor who had performed in blackface. Because it's just like all these things I just was learning, I was like, that's really weird and crazy. Why do they have, he's already Black, why did they have to be in blackface? And it's a small thing, but it was just like touches of the history that just give life and flesh to these characters and maybe make you wonder a little bit about them. I know I've heard from people who are like, hey, I was looking at all the stuff that you were putting in there to see if it was real, and it was real. And I'm like, yeah, except for the spirits and the magic, like 99% of everything, the places are real. I tried to even put real people who nobody would know, but like if I read a book and they were like, oh, Miss Hattie owned this restaurant, I'm like, I put Miss Hattie in the book. She just might be serving food at the restaurant, but she was real. So yeah, I had a lot of fun doing that.
And it was great reading it, like I said. So, how was the research for this? Because I can imagine it's not something you can just go to a library and read one book. Oh, I got these famous people. How extensive was your research?
I had never done a real historical in our world before. My previous series, Earthsinger Chronicles, is Second World fantasy, and it takes place in a similar time period in sort of an alternate 1920s. So I did research for that, but it didn't have to be extensive because I was making up a lot of stuff, and I just wanted the research to ground me into making it realistic. So once I decided it was real DC and I was just adding magic, I was even trying to make the magic really grounded towards like African American folk magic, things like roots and conjure, and things that you might have read about in other books, like Toni Morrison does a lot of that stuff, Alice Walker. It's just grounded as much as possible with my own spin on it. But like I said, I was writing, in the middle of 2020, so all the libraries were closed. So that made kind of learning how to do research completely online something I had to teach myself. And it was a lot of falling down rabbit holes. JSTOR.org, which is a website that if you're in college or you're familiar with, it's like academic papers and journals and things like that. I spent a lot of time on JSTOR reading, just, it'll be a random thing, but lots of history that will lead me to culture, that will lead me to something else. I did a whole couple of weeks on this very specific, like African magical system that I wanted to draw from. So it was teaching myself how to research, how to keep track of my notes and all of that. And then, finding things to put in the book to make it more interesting, and also, but not wanting it to feel like I learned this and you have to know it too, because sometimes you read a book and it's like you can tell the author did a lot of research and they want you to know. And I was hoping it wouldn't be like that, just like long lists of facts and information. I was really trying to integrate it. So used books, I bought several used books since I couldn't go to the library, and they're a little cheaper from used bookstores, or things that you wouldn't find in a bookstore because they're old books. Things like oral histories and just real people from that time period talking about some random town in Virginia where they grew up in. Like there's so much inspiration from so many different places that it's hard to pinpoint it. But it was just allowing myself the time, several months, to just dive into everything. Lots of old newspapers, like newspapers.com, and the Library of Congress website have a lot of old newspapers, and steeping myself in the time and culture and just trying to bring everything back to life inside of the story and inside of the story world, and kind of the world building, like similar world building that I would do for my second world fantasy when I'm creating everything from scratch. It's a lot easier not to, but I still have to learn, lots of things about the 20s. Everything from, did they have sidewalks? Like, when did they start paving the roads? And when were the street lamps go from gas to electric? And just things that maybe didn't need to be in the book, but I was curious and I wanted to make it, as accurate as possible.
I was going to say, I really think you did. You integrated everything really well. It wasn't like, as you're reading it, like a textbook. It was like a real story. And so, like, if you're just a reader, you're not paying attention, you'll be like, oh, this part of you listen on the radio, on the newspaper. Okay, fine. But then, like, me as a teacher, I'm like, oh, she brought him in here? Oh, wow. So, and I thought that was great, and I really appreciate that. So if I was going to go to DC, are there any places or any spots I should check out related to Black Broadway?
Yeah, Dr. Woodson's house is actually there. It's a museum. It's under renovation right now, so I actually haven't been able to go inside, but it's open to the public whenever they finish. And a lot of the spots, there's nightclubs that the building is still there, even if it's not the same club. There is a place, Republic Gardens, which is a famous nightclub that was still Republic Gardens up until like 2016, and then some other place bought it. So it had been almost like over 100 years, as off and on. Like during the riots in the 60s, things closed down. The Lincoln Theater is still there. The Howard Theater was renovated in the early 2000s and is still there. So there's a lot of places that have been revitalized and that you can actually go to and that are in there. And some places, of course, are lost because of just time and gentrification and things like that. But there's enough there that you could kind of do a walking tour if you wanted to, because it's all in a few square blocks,
Yeah, because when I was reading about their apartment, Clara and Zelda's apartment, and the way you're describing it, it really felt like a real place. And obviously it is. which is awesome, because now, because I'm from Virginia, so when I go back to visit my family, I'm like, oh, can I make the 3-hour drive to DC? Yes.
Right.
I spent a day just checking it out, and I really appreciate how you enlightened me with this book and the information it contained. So what are you working on next?
So right now I'm working on a couple of books. My next historical fantasy, it takes place about 10 years after this one. It's not a sequel. This book is a standalone. So if you're, want to break from long series, it's good to check it out. I wrote a long series before this, so I was like, doing a standalone is great. So I'm writing another standalone right now. 1935, it takes place in an all-black town in the South, and the town is being threatened by the construction of a dam. So I was doing research on drowned towns, which is a phenomena of all kinds of towns all over the country are underneath, bodies of water. And so there's a magical element of how they're going to try to save their town from being flooded. And so that will probably be out in early 2024. I also have a paranormal romance series, a trilogy. So Savage City is the first book in that, and I'm working on the second book. It's like a futuristic dystopian paranormal romance with shifters. So people turn into animals, and there's two different warring clans of animals. And the first book is a portal fantasy that, someone comes from our world to this world and has to impersonate the princess of one of the shifter clans. And so the second book is a follow-up of that, and that should be out next spring.
So much to read, which I like. So you mentioned the first series. Was it Quartet?
So Earthinger Chronicles, there's 4 novels and 3 novellas. Okay. So technically it's 7 books. And yeah, it took me, 9 years or so to get all of those out. So it was great, but it was also exhausting.
Of all of the books you have written, if you could be a character within any of those books, which book would it be?
Yeah, people always ask, like, oh, where would you want to live? And in your own world. I try to make them so that I wouldn't want to live in any of them. Things work out in the end, but it's kind of a slog. I don't know. I think dystopian is interesting, but I don't know if I would want to be a character in that book either. But I don't know if I want to live in the 1920s. Maybe Earthsinger Chronicles, which is the epic fantasy series, just because it's a kind of a diesel punk edge to it. So I think it'd be cool to fly around in an airship, and there's airship races and kind of cool stuff like that. So I would maybe Clove is a character who is an airship pilot in that series. That'd be cool.
Awesome. So we have a younger person in the crowd. Out of all of your books, what would be the book she could read?
I think the Monsters We Defy, probably.
Yes.
Yeah. The other books are definitely romance. So in a few years.
In a few years. Yeah, I was going to say it is. It is an adult book, but it could pass for YA.
Yeah, there's not. I don't think there's anything crazy or objectionable.
No, I don't think so. It was really fun. Yes. Anybody have any questions?
I do multiple books at the same time. Yeah, that can be hard. It's harder for me to come out the same stage in different books at the same time. So, if I'm first doing a first draft, I can't really do two things, but I can do a first draft of one and like a revision of another. And then I chunk my time. So I usually write in the mornings. And if I'm doing two at the same time, either I'll start off, a couple of hours on a draft of book one, and then, a couple of hours revising book two, either right after or like a short break or later in the day. And once I get back into the book that I'm writing, I'm in it. And usually that requires rereading the last thing I wrote. So I reread the previous chapter, whatever I worked on the day before. And then, my mind can kind of make the switch. But it is difficult holding like worlds, like multiple worlds in your head and multiple people's story arcs. But lots of notes. I do have a lot of notes. I, digitally and in a notebook also. And I'm a plotter. So I plot everything ahead of time. So if I get, confused or I can't remember what I was doing, hopefully I'll have, a worksheet or spreadsheet, some kind of note that I'll be like, okay, this is where I was going. Planning the scenes out ahead of time helps with that too. So, and they're different enough. Usually if I'm working on two things, it'll be like a futuristic thing and a historical thing, so that they're also separated in my head a little bit more also. Yeah, Earthsinger Chronicles. So I wanted it initially to be fantasy romance. And so there's two styles of romance. You could have, a different couple per book, or follow the same couple in every book in a series. So my goal was to do a different couple per book. And there is an overarching plot line across the whole series, but because that was the style I was going for, it meant that basically it didn't actually work out, because there's a couple that spans two books before they get their happily ever after. I just bit off a little more than I could chew there, but there is still a discrete couple in every book who fall in love. And yeah, that's kind of my favorite thing to read. But there is the storyline, there's the overarching plot of the series goes across all of them. Thank you so much. 90% of the time I don't listen to music. I listen to coffee shop sounds. I have a program called Coffeetivity that I play because I'm at home in my office. The 10% of the time that I do is usually when I'm looking for inspiration. So I did create a playlist for Monsters We Defy. I think it's on my website. Yeah, there's a Spotify playlist if you want to check out my website. And it ranges. It's I can't remember what's on it right now, but usually when I'm writing, I have to have no lyrics, just instrumental music, because the lyrics will get in my head and distract me. But it's kind of like when I'm brainstorming, I'll play songs with lyrics, and sometimes the lyrics will really influence things. So like with this one, I got a lot of inspiration from Cassandra Wilson, who's a jazz singer, and she had an album in the late 90s, like 1995, called Blue Moon Daughter. And there were a couple of songs that I had on the playlist because I love that album so much. I just played it over and over again. And there's some themes that, there's a song called Solomon Sang that was really inspiring. There's a little bit, it's not really a spoiler, but there's something about King Solomon and Queen Makeda, the Queen of Sheba, in the book. And so things like that, I use them as inspiration. I'll be like, if I get stuck, it's not really writer's block, but I'll just be like, I'm not sure what's going to happen next. I have all of these options. Then sometimes music will help me figure it out. Just listening to it, whether it's the lyrics or just however inspiration works, like something, it'll spark an idea. I'll be like, oh, okay, I got it now. And then that song will go on the playlist. And as I'm writing that, like after I finish writing or before I start my writing session, I might play a couple of those songs to get me in the mood or to just like fire that inspiration again. Mm-hmm. I think that my mother's favorite show was The Twilight Zone. And so I watched a lot of Twilight Zone growing up, Outer Limits, Tales from the Dark Side, all of those kind of shows. And so they're not really like fantasy. I don't know what you call those kind of shows, but they have fantasy elements in them. And there's always something a little bit off, a little different, a little bit, otherworldly about them. And so when I started writing, like, again, like I've always written, but I stopped. I wasn't writing towards publication for a long time. After college, I was just like working and doing stuff until I had gotten married and we moved to a place where I didn't know anyone. And so I started taking writing classes, and that's when I started writing again, just as a way to meet people and like do something in a new city. And so everything I've written since then has always had some kind of magic in it. And even when I try not to, it comes in like against my will. So it's just part of me. I think it's just the things I like to read have that. I read other stuff too. I read plenty of like contemporary, non-magical things, non-sci-fi fantasy. But yeah, it just feels like it's natural, and I don't fight it anymore. I just let it come and try to figure out what the magic's going to be, what the fantastical element is going to be, and roll with that. Okay. In Monsters, nobody changed significantly. I think that there was feedback. My first drafts are usually very short, not very short, but I think this book is about 100,000 words. I think the first draft I turned in was something like 75,000, and that's normal for me. My editor was like, "You have to add 20,000 words." And I'm like, "Okay." So things get expanded upon, but no one really radically shifted personalities or anything. Sometimes motivations will change or be tweaked, but that's usually happening within the first draft. Like by the time I finish the first draft, I know who the people are, and the revision is just about conforming that. Because sometimes I might start a first draft, and by the beginning to the end, they've changed. But I figured it out by the end, and now the revision is making the beginning match the end, more so than actually changing them radically. Not really a message so much. I wanted it to write a book about community and about like people supporting their community and being there and lifting it up. And that's why I wanted it to be sort of a self-contained insular world inside of the city. Most of the story is taking place within 10 square blocks. And yeah, not necessarily a message, but just like the idea, those kind of the themes that I was working with. Like what does a community mean? What does it take to maintain it and sustain it in the face of opposition? And how can we all kind of just be a little bit better stewards of our community? There's so much research. The first thing that comes to mind is the Whitelaw Hotel, which it's at the end of the book. There's a big gala there. So no spoilers, but it was a Black-owned hotel, Black architect, built in the 20s. The history of that, little pieces of it are in there. And it was just like this, I found pictures. And so a lot of it was me scouring the internet for pictures of this place to try to describe it. And everybody I guess what was surprising, which is a little bit sad, was that, I think about people like Black life in the 1920s, and I just kind of think of the horrors. I think of how difficult it must have been to deal with, that level of racism and the violence and rioting and all of that stuff. But researching was just about finding out how good the lives were too. Like, people were just literally living their best life. They didn't let things stop them. They were pushing forward. They were opening businesses. They were, just fighting back, and not necessarily in like an activism way, but just living their lives and having good, fulfilling lives and families. And not everything was gloom and doom and terrible. And so that really impressed me. And I wanted to make sure that was in there too, that people understood that. I don't have any ideas at the moment that are futuristic sci-fi. Like the Savage City series is, near future, but it's still alternate world, and I don't necessarily consider it sci-fi. So yeah, I think you never know. I have a long list of ideas that I will never live long enough to write all of those stories, and more are coming every day. So, well, not every day, but like regularly. So maybe that could come, but not at the moment. Sure. So yeah, I did start self-published. My very first book, Song of Blood and Stone, I brought out myself in 2015. That year I actually published 4 books, 2 in that series, in Earthsinger Chronicles, and then 2 paranormal romance. And then I got picked up by St. Martin's Press to republish the Earthsinger Chronicles. And yeah, I was always a DIY person. I have a degree in film production, so I was doing indie film. I co-founded a literary magazine. I was just, I just loved just not having to ask people for permission, and just kind of putting things out into the world. And I also just didn't trust traditional publishing. So when the opportunity came, an editor contacted me via my website, contact form. And, in terms of an editor from St. Martin's Press to eventually republish those books. And the 4 novels came out with them. And I still am hybrid. So I still do indie publishing and I do traditional publishing. So I like both. I like being in bookstores. It's much harder to get into a store like this if you're completely self-published. I also like having the control of self-publishing. And because I learned all of those skills, I learned how to make ebooks and lay out print books. And I contacting the cover designer and finding an editor to work with. But then you also have to pay them. And so there's pros and cons to everything. Working with a team of professionals at a publishing house is also really fulfilling too, because they do all that stuff, and you can work with their expertise and have other opportunities that come into play. So sometimes people will ask me, "Oh, should I self-publish? Should I go traditional?" And it's really about the book. There are certain genres of books that work better traditionally published than trying to self-publish them. And also, your personality, what kind of books you're writing, what you want out of your career. If you always dreamed of seeing your book on a bookshelf, in the store, or are you okay with just being mostly digital? And there's lots of different reasons why you go one or the other. And traditional, also, there are gatekeepers, so you have to be chosen. An agent usually has to choose you, and then the editor has to choose you. So it's not always a choice. I'm just going to do this. You can pursue traditional publishing, but you can always self-publish. And yeah, pros and cons to both. So I still hope to do both, going forward in the future with different ideas that I have.
Savage City is self-published, right?
Yeah. Most of my paranormal romance is self-published.
Nice.
Personal rules. It's interesting. I think that, characters with a code of behavior are always interesting. A man's got to have a code, and a woman has to have a code too, right? Everyone should have a code. When you're writing characters that are heroic, but also are drag kicking and screaming into being heroic, that's always interesting. And I think that even though Clara is that person, drag kicking and screaming, she has a good heart, and you always see her trying to help others. She might deny that she cares about anyone else, but she's not going to walk by a situation where someone is being harassed or, threatened and not insert herself, no matter what the consequences might be to her. And that kind of thing is just a code that she might not even admit that she has, but it's there. And I think that I'm mostly interested in writing characters like that, at least for the protagonists that have it sort of, even if it's not, they're not heroes on sword, on horses with swords like knights in shining armor. They've got those qualities within them. Yeah, that I dealt with that a lot because my personality, I really like to cleave to reality. Like I wanted everything to be as real as possible. I talked about the research, and I made a list of all the things that I was changing. I was like, well, this movie didn't actually come out until November, but this is August. Like little things like that no one else would actually know, but it just bugged me. So I might not be the best person to answer that, but I think that you're telling a story, and you don't want it to be a textbook. This is not a history book. It is commercial genre, fiction, fantasy that I want it to be entertaining, and that has to be very important. So it has to be true to the characters and be true to the story. And if it wasn't that, either I left it out or I gave myself permission to make small changes. I didn't want to change anything too huge, and different writers will have different comfort levels with that. Like for me, I'm working on another story that takes place in the 1830s in New Orleans, and doing the same thing and trying not to change too much. I know that a lot of writers do it, are very comfortable, like, okay, we're just going to fictionalize everything. I think it's my style and my personal preference is to do that as little as possible. When I really need to, I would, but I would prefer to find another way as opposed to warping history. If there's some other way to accomplish the goal, like just leave that out, be very vague about the dates and the details if it's a problem, or find another way that doesn't have me having to warp things, because that does bother me personally. Yeah, writing. Sometimes I will finish writing a scene and I'll feel like I just worked out. Like it's the emotional labor, like the creative work can affect your body. Like you really do feel tired. And so for me, that it just means filling the well, usually. So finding something great to read, or watching something on television, watching a movie, watching something that I love, listening to music. Most often for me, it's reading. I have to fill the well back up with just something that's going to be inspiring, or that's just going to give me the nourishment I need to go back the next day and, put it all out there on the page. Yes. It all goes hand in hand. So most of my stories come from some kernel that includes a little of all of them. Like Song of Blood and Stone, the first thing I saw was a young woman on a porch with a shotgun in her hand, and these men are coming, and she's coming towards her. And that's all I had. I didn't know who she was. She had a shotgun, so it wasn't the Middle Ages. That helped me figure out the time period. So for this, like I said, the only thing I had was Harlem Renaissance fantasy heist. And that it's not specific characters, but somebody's going to be stealing something from somewhere. So there are characters inherent in the idea, and I found them all together. So it's kind of a round robin. It's a little bit scattershot, where I will figure out, okay, who are these people who are stealing things? Where are they? Going back and forth between all of those things, and then the world fills itself in based on those things. And that's how the writing process goes for me too. I will spend an hour on character work and then realize I don't know enough about the world. So I'll spend another hour in the world and then go back to the plot and then go back to the character. And so that's probably why it's also exhausting, because it's not easy. But everything has to kind of come together and be built together. I'm listening to an audiobook right now, which is Adriana Herrera's Caribbean Heiress in Paris, which is fantastic. And I probably will be listening to it for a long time because the narrator is great. There's also a book that I'm reading, which is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea. Is that what it's called? Yeah. I'm still early in that one too. And as far as watching, I finished Sandman like last week. I was waiting. I haven't watched the bonus in the least. And yeah, I don't watch a ton of TV anymore, but I do try to. We're watching, what is it? The She-Hulk. Yeah, so I'm probably behind on that too. And so yeah, and inspiration can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to be the same genre. A lot of times I won't read the same genre while I'm writing it, but yeah, it's just something to get the juices flowing a little bit.
I would suggest watching A League of Their Own.
The show?
Yeah, I started watching it last night, and I was like, wow, it's really good.
Oh, cool.
Especially if, so I guess this is set in the 1930s, 40s during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like obviously right after your book is written, but it still has a lot. I like the fact how they included African American in the story, and her fight to play baseball, like the white girls are playing baseball, and like the black men are playing baseball. So, just an idea.
Cool, yeah. Thanks.
Yes, definitely. So, was there ever a teacher that influenced you or encouraged you to write when you were younger?
I took a lot of writing classes. I think Mr. Bodmer was my writing teacher in middle school, and yeah, I think my mom ran into him recently. I think, but I mean, a lot of teachers helped me along the way, and I was doing workshops during the summer and all of that. But yeah, I think my middle school writing teacher, and then Miss Elliott in high school, I was on the literary magazine, and she was the sponsor of the literary magazine, and then eventually I was one of the editors. So yeah. Shout out to all the teachers out there doing their jobs, helping these kids.
We try our best.
And librarians too.
Definitely librarians.
Yeah, helps a lot.
I was going to say thank you for being here with us. We enjoyed your talk about your book. And if you haven't purchased, I would suggest purchasing Monsters We Defy.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming out. I really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you everyone online. Thank you everyone.